Michelle, I think you're
Oh,
muted.
I am muted. Dang. Hey, y'all. This is so exciting. I'm so thrilled. We're at 2.2 thousand and breaking it. We are ready for you.
Hey everyone, this is Vu. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seattle chapter of Community-Centric Fundraising.
And
So
I'm
just here.
Michelle Shireen Muri. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the other co-chair of our Seattle chapter of Community-Centric Fundraising.
And let's just say we're a little bit nervous right now because I don't think we've ever spoken to 2,200 people before, especially not on a webinar. So I'm really excited you're here. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's going to be an amazing hour. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items, and then we'll launch into the event. We'll open our chat later. Apologies if we've been trying to get closed captioning to work, and unfortunately, we've been having some challenges. So I want to apologize to everyone. We are working on that. All of our videos on our website should have closed captioning from now on. Please get some paper and a pen or something to write with because we'll probably be doing some writing activities. The purpose of this work, you may have, of today, you may have heard about community-centric fundraising from my blog, Nonprofit AF. But I just want to say that I've been probably getting way more credit than I should have. And a lot of this work has been done by so many people, the team, especially Michelle and others on the Seattle chapter Community-Centric Fundraising. So I just want to let you know that this work could not be done without everyone pitching in. And I'm just really excited and very grateful for everyone. So today's purpose is just to introduce you to the history of community-centric fundraising, what we've been up to, what we're really excited about, and how do we move this work forward, how you can be involved with it. There's no way we can solve everything at all. This is just the beginning. And yeah, it's really exciting. So I want to start just by saying how much I appreciate fundraisers in our chapter. You all of us have worked so hard. We are so creative. And the work is not possible without all of us doing everything that we can. We are so creative. I always think of us like on an episode of Chopped, right? Where people are given a basket of items and you're like, you have to go and, here's a trout and some marshmallow peeps, go and make a dessert or something, right? And I think of that when I think of fundraisers. It's like, here is a CRM that's 5 years old and here's a website and you don't have any budget for it. Go and end poverty. And we do it every single day. And I am just so appreciative of our sector and of the fundraisers in it. And at the same time, y'all, we have to understand that we're like fish swimming in the waters of white supremacy and anti-Blackness and racism and misogyny and xenophobia. And while we're trying to address these things, we are often complicit in perpetuating them in the way that we go about doing fundraising. So we want to start just having this movement where we can talk about how we do this in a way that we can actually center racial and economic justice and the people who are most affected by injustice in the work. So I'm really excited about today. I probably missed a few things. We'll get to them, but I want to pass it over to our co-chair, Michelle Muri, to kick us off.
Yeah, thank you, Vu. I love working with you, and we do have a team. You'll meet the rest of us in a few minutes. I love fundraising and got my start at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. I see you homies on this call. I love that the whole team is here. And, I love fundraisers. I love fundraising, but I love fundraisers because we can see a vision of something that can be built, whether it's a building or a program, maybe it's affecting policy change, and we can raise money for it and make it happen. I love that about our occupation, and I love that about our people. We're usually the most charming folks in our organization. We are the catalyst between so many stakeholder groups. And I'm excited to be here with y'all today because we have an important role to play in shaping the sector and changing narratives. About a year and a half ago, I started working with Edgar Villanueva and the Decolonizing Wealth Project. And when I was at an event with him, I met somebody who approached me because they'd made all of their wealth off of the creation of a chemical that was used to kill and maim people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And that chemical still has negative effects on those communities today. But this person who had inherited all this wealth from this awful chemical that had been used to kill people was simply going to give most of it to her children when she passed, and a small sliver to a local community organization that had literally nothing to do with that money. That money is literally blood money. And the conversation that she wasn't having yet should be about where that money can go to create repair from the harm that it caused. That is an example of unexamined wealth, and that could be one thing that that person could do to start the repair process. There is a Boston Foundation, on the other hand, who is transferring 100% of its wealth to communities by 2025 because they've come to believe that the only way that we can dismantle power is to invest in communities. And they're not worried about the future and giving all that money away instead of keeping it, because they know that other folks will come. They're beating that scarcity mindset, and they know that other folks will come. Another organization, a foundation in Minnesota, knows that they made that money off of the creation of railroads going to the West, and they murdered Indigenous people for it, stole land, and used enslaved labor. When they interrogated where that money was made, because obviously no one had been directly connected anymore that's at that foundation, they decided to give the majority of their funding every year to Indigenous communities. In that first story, the wealth hasn't been examined and reconciled, but in the latter, the process has begun. And I think that's part of how this movement can be defined. How can we apply a high degree of self-reflection and even self-interrogation, not only in our own lives, but in those of our organizations, the foundations that we take money from, and our sector as a whole? How can we move towards anti-racism? So we're glad that you're here today, and whether you've already started to incorporate community-centric fundraising practices into what you do day to day, or if you're brand new to the concepts, we welcome you. Anywhere that you are along the spectrum is okay, and we have created this for you. We can't wait to see how this movement grows together. And in that vein, we're going to introduce you to one of Seattle's CCF leaders, Anna Rebecca, to do an acknowledgement of the native land that we're on today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Vu. Hi, I'm Anna Rebecca Lopez. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm going to do an acknowledgement of native land. We would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and that we occupy this land. We acknowledge the Duwamish and Snohomish peoples on whose land the CCF group occupies. These people are not only the first stewards of this land in which we work, live, and build community, they are still here. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we are on. I would like to take this time to invite you all to also identify the native lands on which you're currently occupying, the lands that you live and reside and work and play. It's important that we take the time to recognize our Indigenous communities, and I know I saw some in the chat that some people already are, so thank you for doing so. If you don't know which land you're currently occupying, there's a great resource that I highly recommend called native-land.ca. So it's native-land.ca, and you can see it on the screen right now. And this will take you to another web page or website, and you can go ahead and enter the zip code, city, state, region, territory that you are currently on. And this will show you the native lands where you are currently occupying. So I'm going to give you all a minute to check that out. The link is also in the chat. And we'll give you a minute, well, a little less than a minute, but we'll give you time. And once you've identified and seen the native land you're on, we're now going to go to another site, menti.com. So this is kind of an interactive component that we're doing here with you all. So menti.com, it's also going to be on the web chat as well. So menti.com. If it asks for an access code, it's 528381. And as you can see on the screen, I want you to go ahead and enter the name of the native land that you are on. All those links are going to be in the chat, so you can go ahead and reference that. So step 1, nativeland.ca. Second step, menti.com. Enter in the native land that you are on. And once you've done that, head on back to the webinar. I know this is a lot of steps, but we're doing great. All right. So we'll give everyone time to do that. And once you head back to the webinar, we want to show a word cloud that is quickly generating to show the representation in the room today. And we'll be able to see the names of the tribes and the land. And the larger the name, the more people who are currently residing on that land. And this does two things. It will show you personally if there are others who are also residing on the land who has been stewarded by the same indigenous peoples as the land you are. So you'll see if there are some neighbors here. And it's also a beautiful representation of the fact that all of us are on indigenous land. No one is exempt from this. And it's important that we take the time to acknowledge the people and the stewards of this land, as this is one step away from erasure and toward decolonization. So I see a lot of Duwamish, Coast Salish, so yeah, Pacific Northwest folks representing. All right. So in addition to recognizing the indigenous peoples who have stewarded our land since time immemorial, we'd also like to do a bit more recognizing of who is in this Zoom webinar. So I want you to go back to menti.com. The link is in the chat, so you can just go back to there, menti.com. And let us know what area you're currently working in, what sector. We are assuming that most of you are currently working or volunteering with a nonprofit or mission-driven organization. There are some pre-identified options on there, so go ahead and click on those. And we want to see who's represented here today. What are those areas and nonprofit sectors? So it looks like we have a lot of people in the human rights and social justice, community organizing, and then looks like arts and culture as well. And then a few who don't work for an organization, some consultants and independents. Thank you all for being here. So thank you for joining us today. Next, I'd like to invite Andrea to ground us during the COVID-19 pandemic and to give us some context around how it's affecting our communities.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Arenas, and I use she, her pronouns. We would now like to take the time to acknowledge the impact of the global pandemic and how COVID-19 is affecting us all. We acknowledge how the pandemic is impacting many communities of color disproportionately, while also illuminating many of the unjust systems regarding health, housing, education, and imprisonment. We acknowledge how the pandemic is impacting all aspects of our personal and professional lives. Personally, we may be caregivers, we may need care. We understand that this virus has upended many of our lives and has also provided us room to reflect on the many systems we have previously relied on. Professionally, as fundraisers or folks in the nonprofit and philanthropy realm, we recognize that this pandemic hit us during a prime fundraising and gala season. This caused many of us to have to pivot and adjust quickly. Where I work, we needed to cancel 3 events and quickly reevaluate our fundraising goals and develop a pivot strategy. Also, as our workplaces all over the world scrambled to transition to working from home, many realized how important it is to center accessibility in our work, not only when there is a pandemic, but always, and how those who have already been centering accessibility were better prepared to handle this transition. This crisis has also highlighted how we as humans are social beings. We crave and need human connection, and this really is amplified in our work. As fundraisers, connection is our heartbeat, our lifeblood. We acknowledge how the isolation and individualism we experience in our work lives is a product of capitalism. This pandemic has affirmed our interdependence, and we acknowledge that the best and only way forward is to work together to create a better world. And now I'd like to introduce Christina Shimizu to discuss how, among a global pandemic, we also have a people's uprising in our country and across the world.
Hey everyone. My computer is kind of tripping out. Let me see. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, you're fine and great.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Andrea. My name is Chrissy. I use she, her pronouns. I want to thank everyone on this call for being here today and taking this journey with us. You may have noticed that there is an uprising in the streets right now, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, I want to acknowledge the work of making fundraising less racist is in fact built upon decades and generations of knowledge. So we'd like to really thank our first teachers in this work. And as I do that, I want to encourage all of you to just drop some names and people and resources in the chat of those who've helped you along your political journey. So I want to thank Western State Center, Activists Mobilizing for Power, the Grassroots Institute for Fundraising Training, the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, the nonprofit Anti-Racism Coalition, Social Justice Fund Northwest, shout out to Mijo, I saw you join, and of course the brilliance and canon that is The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. Thank you to these teachers for paving the way to critiquing the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. Thank you for teaching us how to undo racism and dismantle harm. You guys have been doing this work for many, many years, and we appreciate you. And so a few years ago, a group of us started meeting regularly to tackle this work in our own city. And today, here we are in the midst of a rapidly changing world and thankfully a sustained uprising for Black lives. I also want to just send my love to everyone out across the nation who are fighting and in the streets. This is active uprising, and it has been very dangerous for protesters. And we're here from Seattle, but we're sending our love to all of you. I think it's important to note that this movement, though, is not just in the streets or it's not in the halls of government. It's not just something that's over there. It's something that requires all of us to take action and to figure out what our role is. This movement brings to light, too, the wisdom and knowledge that Black women and queer women of color have held for years and years. Their wisdom and lived experiences gave us words and ways of seeing and understanding things like the nonprofit industrial complex and the prison industrial complex. They gave us art, poetry, theory, and roadmaps to understand what true healing and decolonization means. People like Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, Cherry Moraga, Yuri Kochiyama, and many others. I don't know if all of you saw it, but I'm imagining a recent photo, a protest photo of Angela Davis on Juneteenth, and her gray hair from years of living and fighting, and how different she looks than the pictures from the 60s and 70s when she was a young activist, but how powerful it was to see her surrounded by a new generation of young activists rising up in the streets around her, being able to help her bring her abolitionist dream to life in her own lifetime. It was amazing. So I say all this because I want to acknowledge that the work that we're doing right now is not reinventing the wheel. Although for some of us, this work may feel new and overwhelming, this political analysis and these models exist. We just need to educate ourselves and be willing to disrupt power. These harm reduction models have existed in particular in the work of Black trans femmes and trans sex workers who have been working and leading and caring for their communities from the margins for decades. Organizations here in Seattle like POC Greenlight Project, Queer the Land, the Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network, Black Trans Task Force, and Utopia. Their work shows us what it truly means to center disability justice, trauma-informed care, culturally informed care, peer-to-peer advocacy, peer-to-peer counseling, and decolonizing ideas of what healing and safety and community care can actually look like in practice. I say this because it's important to note that the work of BIPOC trans communities has existed in the margins, not only because of disproportionate harm caused by cops and by public health and by unjust laws, but because of the harm caused by our very own sector and neglect from the nonprofit sector. Less than 25% of grants available in the US go to trans-led orgs. In fact, the New York Times reported last year that only 0.6% of foundation funding is targeted to Black and POC women. And actually this year, the Chronicle of Philanthropy released a report that POC-led orgs that focus on improving health and life outcomes for Black men receive 45% less funding than white-led orgs. The lessons and work of Black trans women must inform how we all move forward in this movement and in this moment of accelerated learning and change. So what does this mean in the context of the current uprising and reimagining of public safety? And what is our role in all of this as fundraisers? Last week in Seattle, and I hope in other cities across the nation, feel free to drop your info in the comments. Last week in Seattle was a historic moment in our movement. We got a veto-proof majority of our city council committed to defunding the police by at least 50% and to reinvest that revenue into things that actually keep our community safe. Things like family and community mediation, drug user health, mental health, youth programs, and so much more. Basically, like, these are all the things that our sector provides. The opportunity to expand resources in our community is exciting, and yet we all know that the power dynamics within our sector continue to perpetuate harm. There is work we must do to prepare ourselves for a new way of being in the world and relating to one another so that divestment from police and reinvestment in community does not replicate more harm. So again, what is our role and what steps do we take to transform? We're living through a historic uprising for Black lives, so we can't just issue Black Lives Matter statements without making clear commitments to material change. And I do not mean diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that this movement has actually pushed us beyond that. And I am hoping that we actually have an opportunity for real ass political education and folks needing to just give up power. And we will feel it when we give up power. And that is how we know we are doing the work. We can't just talk about DEI and outsource that work by hiring a staff position that isn't given real authority to disrupt power, or isn't even given a budget for training, or is housed in HR where it does not belong. We can't outsource this work to a staff person or to anybody. It is work that we all have to do individually, and it's personal. So now it's time to catch up with what communities of color have known for a long time. If we lean on diversity hires, they immediately become the problem person of color if they speak out at their workplace. Diversity hires are set up to assimilate or fail unless we uproot the structural racism in our organizations. How many of you on this call have been the problem person of color in your organization? We see you and we love you. Or how many of you work for organizations that work to end poverty? And how many ways have we seen how our work in philanthropy and the nonprofit industrial complex perpetuate the power hoarding and wealth hoarding? We need to fix the problem of generational wealth. No one, especially not donors, especially not us and nonprofits, are the saviors of generational poverty. Generational wealth is the problem. We've seen how youth of color and poor people get exploited by fundraising through our story sourcing appeals and events. We have to stop tokenizing and re-traumatizing people we say we're out here to help. Many of us here probably work in nonprofits that have a policy to call the cops more often than we invest in de-escalation and anti-racism training for our staff. We can't forget that Charlena Lyles was murdered by police in her nonprofit operated housing, and that nonprofit had a policy to call the cops. Police were so familiar with that housing site that there was footage from the vehicle's dash cam of the officers joking about Charlena's mental health before leaving their vehicle and murdering her in front of her children. When we call the cops, we are the soft arm of the state. When we don't invest in anti-racism training, when we don't have gender-affirming policies and practices, we are the soft arm of the state. And when our board of directors, executive leadership, and staff do not reflect the communities we serve, we are the soft arm of the state, protecting systems of power that keep people poor. Here's an example of that. Many of us recently came up against conflict in our organizations about whether to issue a BLM statement or endorse policy. How often do we worry about protecting donor relationships and protecting the survival of our individual nonprofit over our ability to advocate for the collective and true needs of our community? We're living through a time of profound change. The pandemic and uprising has shown us that change can actually happen overnight and a lot faster than we were told to believe it could. So we're seeing power in the streets and power that's transforming policy, but how is it transforming us? And I think right now is really a time for us to think about, like, if right now is not the time for us to think about what our demands are for our own sector, then when is that time gonna be? What are we doing right now to transform our sector and to organize with one another to build power and make change? In this moment of historic uprising, we really need to ask ourselves, how are we pushing to grow? How are we pushing to learn how to unlearn and get messy and be accountable to each other and repair harm, heal, and transform? There's change happening, and I am really excited because I believe that a lot of change is on the horizon in our sector. And I'm sending a lot of love out to all of you, and now I'm going to shut up. And the webinar hosts are going to play a video for you. But love and solidarity to all of you across the nation. CCF is part of a larger movement and awakening across the country that we need to transform philanthropy in order to transform change in our communities. Philanthropy and fundraising practices are rooted in a history of exploitation and of racism and of colonization. And in order for us to actually solve the root causes of poverty and other oppressions in our country, we need to completely rethink what philanthropy means and how we participate in it.
Community-centric fundraising was started because we wanted to find new tools and resources to build power for our community. And when I think about fundraising and philanthropy in general, it's about our access to and relationship with wealth. But historically, many marginalized communities haven't had any access to wealth. In fact, it's been taken away or stolen from us.
The whole system that relies on philanthropy sets up a power dynamic that is unhealthy for communities and individuals working for the betterment of their own neighborhoods and communities.
But that's the thing, the systems are producing exactly what they were designed to produce. The systems are working as they were designed to keep the poor poor, to keep the oppressed oppressed.
I think we have to admit that we have been complicit in perpetuating a lot of the injustice we've been fighting. I mean, we've been telling people that it's okay, that they have a whole bunch of money and that they can just give it back. And then we tell them, hey, you're a great person for giving this money back. But that money has oftentimes been the result of slavery and colonization and other forms of injustice. And by just letting people, our donors, the majority of whom are white, feel really good about themselves, then we're perpetuating the things we're trying to fight.
I think there's been a lot of people who, like, I add myself to this, who have like the best of intentions in this work, but we know that intention and impact are two very separate things, and that we've been doing this work for decades and nothing is changing. Unless we do something dramatically different, we're going to still be here talking about these things, talking about poverty and racism, xenophobia and ableism and all these things that are really holding people and holding communities down. And I think people are ready for a change.
So that's why we need to tear down systems and rebuild new systems that work for everybody.
We want to move into a world beyond nonprofits. We want to move into a world beyond philanthropy. We hope that wealth inequality doesn't exist so that we live in a world where wealthy donors and wealthy philanthropists are making decisions for poor communities and communities of color. So how do we move beyond this entire system, which includes philanthropy, donors, and nonprofits that we know perpetuate a cycle of poverty and oppression in our communities?
Yeah, I had been talking to a bunch of fundraisers of color, and also a few white allies who had been very uncomfortable with the way that we have been fundraising. And I wrote about it and added some pictures of baby animals. And I think a few people were really
riled up by this, because we have a really deeply ingrained model in our sector of centering white donors, basically. And so when we started talking to other fundraisers, they said, you know what, we need a new model, how to do this that aligns with our values. Because I think there was a whole lot of people who who've been very uncomfortable and just did not have alternative models or even permission to say, you know what, this is not working for me and my community.
In August 2018, we held a convening for 90 POC fundraisers in the greater Seattle community to come together and to share their voices about what wasn't working in philanthropy. We were connecting with this POC fundraiser community that a lot of us had never met before. That was 90 POC fundraisers in one room. That was definitely new for me. And being able to connect with them. And so much of that event was about the reaffirming that we really need to make fundraising anti-racist. And there's so many practices internally and externally that we're following that needed to change. So it was really amazing to be with that group. And I think since then, that's allowed us to, or encouraged us to pivot to look at both community and also how to dismantle these donor-centric practices.
In May 2019, CCF decided to send a survey to understand what the perceptions of fundraising were in the local sector, but also nationally and even internationally. We were tired of not being heard, of fundraisers of color being dismissed, and our own experiences being denied and gaslit. So we were able to survey over 2,000 nonprofit professionals, and surprise, surprise, the data affirms what we've been saying, that 2/3 of nonprofit professionals are unhappy with the current fundraising philosophies and practices, and that this data affirms that we need to change and that change needs to happen now.
Based on what we learned from our community, there's been a pent-up demand from fundraisers and from nonprofit executive directors, especially those of color, who were feeling isolated and trying to figure it out on their own. There has been nobody to share with or bounce ideas off of. AFP chapters aren't ready to discuss difficult or seemingly political issues. So we built Community-Centric Fundraising.org, not only as a community of support, but as a platform to generate knowledge and wisdom that provides a counter-narrative to the framework, philosophy, and practices of fundraising. There is little space for those of us who aren't part of the white dominant culture to challenge these conventions. This platform will also provide affirmation that the discomfort that people have had with the way things are done in our sector is completely valid. We really haven't had the language, permission, or community to talk about this before. We hope to act as a lab, that this space of sharing will include case studies and stories about what folks are trying and what's working, as well as failures, so that we can learn from each other. And we hope to connect folks who are pushing boundaries, creating chapters across the country or even across the world, and developing solutions that fit locally.
The 10 principles of community-centric fundraising.
Principle 1, fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice.
Principle 2, individual organizational missions are not as important as the collective community.
Principle 3, nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another.
Principle 4, all who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer, staff, donor, or board member.
Principle 5, time is valued equally as money.
Principle 6, we treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent, assume the best intentions, and occasionally have difficult conversations.
Principle 7, we foster a sense of belonging, not othering.
Principle 8, we promote the understanding that everyone, donors, staff, funders, board members, volunteers, personally benefits from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion.
Principle 9, We see the work of social justice as holistic and transformative, not transactional.
Principle 10. We recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice.
Okay, y'all. Hell yeah. I know that this is, it's quite a moment, isn't it? That we're all together right now, right here, 2.7 thousand of us, thinking about these issues, processing these issues, and wanting to take an action around how we can move the dial. So I'm just gonna let it sink in. Chrissy is always that amazing, by the way. She always is that powerful of a speaker. I know we're seeing in the chat comments, and don't worry, we all feel like that. So there's more to come. I know that we just crashed the site. It's okay. We also crashed the Indigenous land site. I feel awful about that. And it's great to bring resources. We'll all level up to be able to handle that traffic. And yeah, visit our content hub. It's going to be a place that centers Black and Indigenous voices, voices of people of color in our sector, and other voices too. It'll be updated with essays, with videos, and with podcasts like mine. I'm actually planning a podcast called The Ethical Rainmaker, which launches on July 29th. And that podcast will be a regular feature of our website. You too can create content like that and make it a feature. Just access our editorial guidelines on the site. I'd like to invite another one of our CCF leaders of our Seattle chapter, Erica Chen, to lead us through what we have the power and resources to do right now.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My heart is beating so fast right now. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Erica Chen, and I use she, her pronouns. So far, you've heard a lot from us, and most of it seems theoretical. So we want to bring it down from the clouds for a minute and talk about practical strategies that you can start enacting today. Originally, we had planned to facilitate a liberating structures activity called 15% Solutions. If you're new to liberating structures, we'll put the link in the chat so you can check it out and maybe even facilitate it with your own development team or fundraising colleague friends in your network. Hopefully we won't crash the Liberating Structures website as well. Maybe just save the link and check it out later. Because unfortunately we can't do that Liberating Structures activity now. We ended up having too many people interested in attending today, and Zoom couldn't accommodate as many breakout rooms as we would have needed. What a great problem for us to have. So even though we can't be in small groups right now, I still want to keep the spirit of that activity. Its purpose is to discover and focus on what each person has the freedom and resources to do now. In the CCF spirit, we've created an aligned actions list as a resource that we'd like to share with you right now. It can be found on our website and shared from our website, which hopefully you can all access. We'll put the link in the chat. Go ahead and click on it and open it up. You'll see it's a sort of checklist that we created. It's okay if you can't print this right now. Hopefully you have some scrap paper nearby where you can brainstorm, or you might be able to download the PDF and start typing on it if that's your style. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read through it and start brainstorming right now. Brainstorm about what you have the power and resources to do now. Say that again. Brainstorm about what you personally have the power and resources to do now. We really believe that everyone, no matter your title or role within an organization, can help move toward community-centric fundraising. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat that it looks like CCF website has crashed. I'm going to try and share it a different way because I do have it. Oh, we're sharing screen. I do have it as a Google Doc too, so maybe I can share the link to the Google Doc. Thank you all for just bearing with us here. I don't think we realized that we would crash our own site today. Again, what a great problem. It's amazing that you are all here. Okay, I'm going to put this link in the chat.
Erica, is that the page you want?
Yes, that's the page I want. Thank you, Mark. Okay, but I also just put the Google Drive. It's of the same PDF, so if you did want to go access it, that's the Google Drive. It's the same one that's on our website. So like I said, I'm going to give you a few minutes to read through it right now and start brainstorming. You'll see that the table headers are what, when, who, and how. The what section details some suggested action items that we've found yielded really positive results in many of our own Seattle-based community organizations, as well as across the nation. The when section, you can use that to set timelines. So this is a good place to consider whether you do have the freedom and resources to do this now, or whether it's best to set medium or long-term timelines. You can use the who section to identify folks who will spearhead action items, if that's not going to be you, or maybe a whole team to carry forward goals. And then the how section can reflect modes or methods in which action items will be carried out. Like I said, I'm going to give you some time right now to read through and start making some notes and plans. It's going to be hard, but I'm going to try and stay quiet actually. Christina said to us in the chat that it feels overwhelming, that everything needs to be examined closely. And yes, absolutely, this is a big movement, big change. But that's why we hope this list can help you identify what things you want to start with. It doesn't have to be starting with everything at the same time.
And Erica, let me know when you want to take down the slide.
Okay, we can leave it up for a little bit more, I think. Thanks, Mark. I think, Mark, we can open up the Zoom chat function for everybody, not just two panelists, because while everybody's brainstorming and planning actions that they want to start with today, I think it'd be great for everybody to share their ideas. Remember, if you have,
it's done.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Remember, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, which is different from chat. We'll be reviewing the questions and answering them over time. There's already a lot in there, but we will try to get to them over time. If you have thoughts, reactions, ideas that you'd like to share about this resource, about the brainstorming that you've been doing right now, put those in the chat. We're going to download the chat later and share it afterwards. So all of the knowledge that's shared here today will be saved and shared with everyone here. So.
And if you want to save the chat yourself and you're on a computer screen, on the bottom right where it says all panelists and attendees, there's 3 dots. If you click on that, it says save chat, and you will be able to save the entire chat as well.
Thank you, Adrienne. Yes, we are all about abundance and collaborating here, if you couldn't tell. So look at all this knowledge we have. We want to share that and collaborate. So type into the chat ideas or plans that you have. Let's see. think, Adrian, it says it's not enabled for attendees to save chat. Maybe we can enable that on the back end. Maureen
Mark
said,
is taking a look at that right now.
thank you. Maureen said that they've already cropped up and, oh, the chat's going fast now and I missed it. I think Maureen said they cropped the pieces that they want to focus on from the document, which is a cool idea. Just crop out the things that are too overwhelming for you right now. One thing fundraisers could do is volunteer to fundraise for candidates and ballot measures. It's focused on social justice. That's a cool idea, Taylor.
The ideas are going by so quickly.
Yeah, the ideas are going by so quickly, but we're going to save it. So this is going to be great to read through later. Accessibility piece is great, can be broadened. Absolutely, that is one thing. So this list is something that we put together over time, but also pretty quickly just recently. And we know that everything, not just this resource, but really everything on our website on community-centricfundraising.org is growing. We hope to grow and expand it, and we hope that you'll all participate in that. Great. So actually next, in addition to sharing all these ideas in the chat, I'd really like to make another word cloud together. This time I want to make a word cloud of feelings. So we're going to put another menti.com link in the chat. Can click the link. It's going to be different from the last link. Or you can go to menti.com and enter the access code 988527. But clicking the link in the chat that Adrian just shared will take you right there. No need for an access code. If you do need the access code, I'll say it one more time, 988527. You might have to leave the Zoom webinar to open the link, but it's just one question, so then you can come right back. Can we share on the screen what the prompt is? Oops. The prompt is, what one word describes how you feel after completing this exercise. You can add up to 3 words, and once you enter your answers, come back to the Zoom webinar because we'll begin sharing the word cloud on the screen. Okay, so here's the prompt on the screen. What's one word that describes how you feel after completing this exercise? I love it, Mary. Ready to work. I see that. And oh, not alone. Love that. Do you feel so connected? And then we can bring up the word cloud and see
What I don't have is the link to that word cloud. Erica, do you have that handy?
Oh, if you go into our Mentimeter account and go to all presentations, do you have that open from the previous Mentimeter?
I do. I have this.
Okay. If you hit backspace until you get back to before you presented, or maybe just try to go to mentimeter.com. It'll bring you back to the home page. You might have to log back in.
Okay. Your presentations. Let's see if that's...
Yes, it should be under your presentations and part 2.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you for walking me through that.
Of course. Thanks for everyone. Well, look at this. Look at it. So many words. All right, overwhelmed, we got that one, yes. But also excited, hopeful, energized, nervous, inspired, empowered, optimistic, eager, curious, ready, connected, supported, thoughtful, determined, powerful, challenged, community. Wow, I love this. Yes, we're ready. This is the first step. Awesome. All right. So now that we've gone from idea generation and planning to being all in our feelings, I'd like to spend the last few minutes doing some visioning together. Let's connect those future plans with our emotions to envision what this could be like. We've stated a few times today that CCF movement envisions a world beyond capitalism and the nonprofit industrial complex, but we also want to meet all of you wherever you already are on your political journey. We know that this is just the start, and we're all starting from different places with different past experiences, knowledge, and visions for the future. So what do we have in common, and what does all of this mean and look like for us each individually? We're experiencing an interesting time in history right now. While there's great tragedy and collective grief happening in our society, there's also a great opportunity. We can reflect on how this pandemic has already drastically changed our everyday lives. We've learned so many lessons that were opened up to us when accessibility, health, work, school, and many aspects of our lives were turned upside down. And social inequalities that have always existed, became more stark. Many of us realize that we don't want things to return to normal, and the opportunity for us is to decide what the new normal we want to create looks like. So I want to spend a few minutes doing some visualization. I know this sort of exercise might be familiar and welcome to some of you, and I know that others will be new to this, but let's try it together. Okay, I want you to get comfortable with your feet firmly planted on the ground. Check in with your body. How's your posture? Are you holding tension in your shoulders, in your neck? If you feel comfortable to do so, please close your eyes. Check in with your breathing. Take a few breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Again, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Try to use all of your senses in this visualization. Picture a scene, hear the sounds, even feel the sensations. It doesn't matter if you can't imagine it in much detail. The most important thing is to feel the emotions and experiences as if they were already true. Try to clear your mind and focus on your breathing. Now let's imagine a time in the future. Where do you find yourself? Inside? Outside? How's the weather? What do you hear? What do you smell? Wherever you find yourself, let's try to imagine we're in a future where the fundraising, nonprofit, and philanthropy sectors are more focused on equity and justice. What does it look like for our organizations to be more centered on the communities who we serve and who are most affected by the issues we want to address? What does it look like for us to be focused on addressing root causes of societal issues? What does it feel like for us to be working in coalitions and partnerships to be more effective? What does it look like for our world overall to be more actively anti-racist? to have systems designed to protect and uplift our communities, especially Black, Indigenous, and communities of color? What does it feel like to exist within an economic system that cares for all and is ethical, fair, and non-exploitative? What does it look like to live in a world beyond nonprofits and foundations, where wealth has been redistributed, a world with abundance and adequate care for all? Try to imagine yourself enjoying the outcomes of these goals. How does it feel to envision these futures? What emotions are you experiencing? How is your body physically reacting to this exercise? Has your breathing changed? Has your posture changed? Check in with yourself and your breathing once again as we come to a close. When you feel ready, open your eyes. How did that feel? What did you see? What thoughts came to mind? Please feel free to share your thoughts and ideas and reactions with us in the chat. And we are running low on time, so I'm going to hand it back to Vu and Michelle to close us out. But I'll be looking at the chat to see what you all say. Teary with hope. Oh, I love that. Okay.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us. We have over 2,000 people still. I am just overwhelmed with gratitude for everyone for spending this hour with us. And I know it is overwhelming, all the stuff I know there's a mixture of emotion, that is excitement and overwhelming and everything. And I just want to let you know, this is the start of a movement, right? We'll be exploring everything together. So you don't have to do everything on that checklist today. There's no possible way you can do that. But we are really excited for you to be in this movement together with us. And there's a whole bunch of things that you can do moving forward. Please subscribe to the mailing list on social media. We have a small gift for you that we have some wallpapers created with the 10 principles that you can download. And they'll be in the chat. And you can have that on your screensaver to be reminded of all the cool principles. Apologies again for the lack of closed captioning during the live portion of this. And what else am I missing, Michelle? Oh, we have a webinar next week on the data we gathered from the fundraising perception report that Anna Rebecca will be presenting on next week. Is it next week? I think so.
Yeah,
right?
it's on the 24th.
Okay, so we're really excited about that. It's going to be incredible. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there.
So y'all, yeah, I echo that. It's amazing to have such a powerful start to this work. And many of us have been doing the work already and just didn't know about each other. We acknowledge that too. And in that vein, you know, we'd like to acknowledge what we learned from the survey that we did and from the summit that we held was that there's this thirst that fundraisers, executive directors, other nonprofit leaders have in our sector. And that thirst is to be able to connect with each other, to find affirmation that what we are feeling actually exists. And there were almost 3,000 people on just this virtual event today, and so many more that wrote us to tell us how sorry they were that they couldn't be here. What could be more community-centric than meeting with people in your own area and partnering with others around interconnected issues? So a couple of days after this event, we're going to be sending you an email, and we're going to be inviting those of you who are interested in starting your own chapters in your own cities, states, or countries to join us by inputting your geographic information. And we're going to figure out, because we don't yet know, the safest way to share that information in geographic regions so that you can connect with all the folks in your own area. And again, this was started by an all-volunteer group, almost all-volunteer group, of folks here in Seattle, and we are going to mess up. And it's totally, we would love to be called out. We would love for your feedback. always, we are capturing all of the questions in the Q&A. We're capturing everything that's been said in the chat. And it's going to take us a while, again, because we're volunteers, to be able to sift through all of that information. But our purpose is to create this platform and have it for you, and to be part of a larger community. So know that we're going to follow up, and that the follow-up email will include, as many of you are requesting in the chat, it'll include everything that we linked to as well in this presentation. Anything else, Vu?
No, thank you so much, everyone. I'm really excited. This is going to change our sector, and we're going to make it happen. Thank you so much.
Feel free to submit content, join the mailing list if you haven't already, you probably did. Come to our event next week. That's about the data that we now have that shows what BIPOC fundraisers have already known and what the rest of us are only now catching on to about our happiness levels and our feelings about the sector. Think about starting a chapter in your city today. Of course, you can donate because, again, money is what built this platform, along with a lot of volunteer labor. And we just wanted to say a few thank yous. If everybody on the team wants to come on, if you want to share a screen, share your video so we can see your faces, come on up. You might be able to see the whole team shortly. But we specifically wanted to thank the Satterberg Foundation, the Group Health Foundation, and some individual donors who funded the launch of our movement. Thank you to Stacy and Jordan of StacyWin.com, who did all of the design work, a lot of the editing work, built the website, all the graphic design, just all of those pieces. Adrian and Mark of Remarkable Arts, who are behind all the technology and some of the design of this, and David Westerland of Be Present, Discover Joy. Join us again on the 24th, and thank you for spending this time with us. We can't wait to see you again.
Bye, everyone.
And do we want to let them know we're going to be open for about 30 minutes?
Oh, yeah. Great point.
Open for 30 minutes?
We will be taking questions for the next 30 minutes. And our whole team is here, almost our whole team.
Well, I'm going to go get some lunch. I'll be right back.
Get it, get it.
High fives.
High five.
Good job, team.
Good job, y'all. Okay, yes. Yes, oh, hi, Sean. Y'all can unmute yourselves.
Hey, how'd it go? What'd I miss? Anything big happen?
Nothing. It was nothing.
Just super chill.
Only
Yeah,
like
so-
5-6 participants?
Yeah, just a few.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's a question about next week's webinar. How do they register for that?
Anna Rebecca.
Yeah, I would say similar process to here. We'll send out an invitation via email and folks can register that way. But still confirming time, so we'll let people know.
Yeah, just make sure you're signed up for our mailing list.
Yeah, sign up for our newsletter.
I've been hearing, I got several emails today before this even started, and I'm seeing in the chat now that is there already a chapter in X city? And no, there are no other chapters that have been started yet. So there's just the Seattle chapter now, but I think that's going to change in the next 24 hours.
You can start your own chapter.
Get it,
You
y'all.
in charge.
Okay.
If you go to our website and fill out the start a chapter in my own city, we'll be able to connect you with other folks in your city who want to get involved as well.
We have a couple of people with their hands up. I can ask them to speak.
And just before we do that, there's somebody who just posted, Amy said the Get Involved page is broken. So, so that sounds like there's a lot of interest in people who want to start their own chapters. So we will, once we get that up and running again, we'll make sure to connect everybody.
Okay, go ahead, Katie, if you want to speak.
You're on mute, Katie.
Yep. Well, meanwhile, we'll go to John McMurtry.
Yes, hello.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
I'm interested in finding out more about starting a chapter here.
Where's
Awesome.
here?
We love that, John.
I'm
yeah,
at
where's here? Where are you?
Lake County, Colorado.
Lake County, Colorado.
Leadville, Colorado. We're at 11,200 feet above sea level. So, yes.
That's awesome.
And it's Lake County Community Fund. We're small. We're new here. We're about 4 years old.
That's great, and that's awesome. Hopefully we can help you a little bit with starting a chapter in your area. It looks like the page is back up on the website, but what we're going to do is in the next day or so after this event ends, we're going to send an email out to everybody who signed up, and we're going to include another link for you. It's optional for you to add in, along with your name and organization, your location, and we're going to try to aggregate that and disseminate that information and connect you with other people in your area so that you can get started creating your own chapter. In the meantime, if you already know, like if you saw anybody on the call today that was from your area, or if you have colleagues or friends that also work for nonprofits in your area, feel free to just start an email chain and see if they want to do a virtual hangout to talk about some of the things we talked about today and what it could look like to start your own chapter.
And it looks like from the chat that Jamie Ward is trying to connect with you, John. So check out that.
Look at that.
Excellent.
There you go.
Making connections.
Awesome.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Okay, I'm going to see if Russ Batten wants to talk.
I just want to thank you all for your time commitment for not just today, but to the lead up of
Meanwhile, someone asked
today.
which article I wrote that got people cranky about. Well, most of them. But this latest one last week was about just stopping the whole board structure is really terrible. We just need to stop the default board structure.
Thanks, Boo. Go ahead, Russ.
No, I'm good. I just wanted to express gratitude about for all of your efforts and leading up to today. And I'm super, super excited to remain committed to our shared work on realizing a society free of capitalism, racism, xenophobia, sexism, and so forth. And so I suppose that with this as a new model in terms of building community, and I'm hearing things about our own chapters and such, what does it take for a group to come together as you all have to build a chapter? Beyond dedicated people to, I mean, like, what would you suggest as starting points for folks getting together that want to start conversations and such? Like, what would be some good baseline suggestions that you might have?
Rayhana or Sean, do one of you want to take that?
Well, I was going to just say, I think our reluctance, our reticence in answering that is reflective of, I think, the collaborative and kind of consensus-based approach that we use to form the group. And I think starting with values is one of the biggest, I think, the core foundation to start from. So pulling together a group of folks to talk through just what are our values, and then moving from there to kind of build. You know, we're still in the process of doing this ourselves. We've talked about we don't have a charter, you know, for our group yet. So that, I think, is a good place to start, is values, and then moving to then what is the vision and mission that moves those, that applies those values to what you want to see.
Yeah, and I think we have very intentionally not created a formulaic, this is exactly how you do it, because we want this to be what works for you and your community, and that's going to look different in different communities. We just got started by, some of us were having discussions, and then about what fundraising was looking like and some of our frustrations, and then we just started meeting for happy hour and having really blunt conversations about what was going on, and then that led to how we could change it and what else we could do. And I think what Sean is saying is absolutely correct. Like, what is your goal? What is your vision? What are your values? And then I think it's just having conversations, sharing information about what works and what doesn't work. I found that as we have implemented community-centric fundraising in my own organization, that being able to talk to all of you and say, okay, I tried this, it didn't work, or how would you do this? What conversations are you having with funders? What does this work look like? Has been really incredibly helpful.
Thanks for the question, Russ. James, do you want to address the question?
Sorry, I just had to restart my computer.
Okay, we'll give you a minute.
We're crashing everything today.
I also, I was just going to add that I think it'd be really great to, if we have a forum to share some of the challenges and obstacles of actually implementing this work, because it's not going to be easy. It's not easy to upend, several centuries of effort to thwart this work. So I think talking about the real challenges would be great as a starting point too. Sorry, Chrissy.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to add that, I think when we envisioned creating this, we wanted to create a content hub, and we didn't want to create a nonprofit or something super organized in a way that could replicate hierarchy or systems of power or any type of gatekeeping. And so the diffuse leadership of the movement, I think, is really important. I think it's also really important for us to just kind of assess where we're at, who do we have relationships with in our communities? Where are we directing our resources and time when we build those relationships in our communities? What other folks are we doing this work alongside and with? And so that's a really good place to start. And I think that building relationships, doing political education work, and some self-assessment work too, to get yourself up in the intersection of your identities, up to speed on how to relate and work with communities is also a really important work. So some of this work you'll do on your own, and some of this work you'll do in relationship with others. And I think that there is something that can be organic about this, but also slow. And doing anti-racism work in the sector, I hear a lot of people wanting quick fixes. They want really concrete examples of what to do within their organizations to solve these problems. There are no quick fixes to this. And I think in there, my teammate said, there's just no one size fits all. So just take the first step, assess the landscape, build relationships, organize within your community, and see what happens.
Laura Skelton asked a similar question, asking if we want to speak to how to work within an organization to really internalize and embrace that shift.
I saw a lot of questions about how do we actually do this work in an organization, because oftentimes people who rock the boat are going to get punished, especially people of color, fundraisers of color. And I think it is important to recognize that it's a systemic issue. It's in HR as well. We have a lot of challenges in HR, as one of my friends is experiencing right now. And that has to be addressed in parallel with everything that we're doing. So it's not, this is why last week I wrote about the board. That needs to change. Boards are mostly white, mostly older white men. So that's one thing that has to change. In the meanwhile, we have HR that is designed to protect the organization, not people, right? So that also has to be changed as well. And the way that we do communication has to change, all of it. And so I think as we launch this movement, it's really important for us to acknowledge that and to understand that there are those of us who have more privileges need to go and step up to protect those who may not have as much when they do speak out, which is why I'm really excited about like chapters and this movement, because as we start talking about more and more of these things, the tide will suddenly start to become where, you know, it'll be difficult for other people to push against it. Just like in the past, people were pushing against Black Lives Matter. And now the tide is so strong that you are seen as the outlier when you don't support Black Lives Matter. So I think that if we all just speak up on how to change our fundraising practices to be more equitable, then it will become the default sort of model and philosophy, and that'll make it much easier for fundraisers and others to push at their own organizations.
Great, thank you. There's some more people with hands raised. Shall we allow, let me see. Javier, is that said right?
Yeah, my name's Javier. I use he, him pronouns. Hey, Erica, how are you doing?
Hey, Javier.
Hey, Vu. I guess I've got a challenge that I'm curious. I've seen blog posts kind of about it, specifically talking about fundraisers having conversations, challenging conversations with donors. And as somebody who is a frontline fundraiser, and I have a lot of different privileges, cis man, hetero, highly educated, affluent, with just a little bit of melanin. But in the fundraising role, that little bit of melanin goes a long way. So I just think about, in terms of fundraisers are going to be the ones having these conversations. That's almost a completely different skill set. I mean, most of us aren't even very good at talking about this with our friends or family. Who you talked about HR. I mean, these things are systemic within, especially if you're working in like a broader organization way, etc. So are you all thinking about this as like a whole new field in terms of folks who talk to donors, in terms of about these challenging issues? Is this really like for frontline fundraisers? Is it, yeah, I'm just kind of curious, trying to tease that out more, as opposed to just like, well, fundraisers start having, start challenging your donors' racism to their face in front of their family,
I'd love to comment on that. So there are many levels to this, and especially for frontline fundraiser, and I'm one of them, I think it's really important to have these conversations around race and gender and equity and, with our donors, because oftentimes with a donor-centric mindset, we have been taught and trained to make donors feel comfortable and avoid these very challenging and very difficult topics. But if we are sincere about having our organizations be grounded in race and equity and social justice, then it's really incumbent upon us to lean into these conversations with courage. And it's not easy to do. And I don't recommend folks just dive into it unless or until we as individual fundraisers have kind of grappled with those topics ourselves, through anti-racism training, diversity and inclusion trainings. Like, we need to be comfortable with the topic matter first before we're able to even begin the conversations with donors or supporters or volunteers. But that said, I do think it should be a goal that we all work toward, especially for the frontline fundraisers.
I would also add that I don't think it's just fundraisers. I mean, as a society, and of course this is coming from the US perspective, that we have a deeply uncomfortable relationship with race in our country. And I grew up in the 80s. That was the era of colorblindness, where we don't see color. We don't talk about those things. So I totally understand how uncomfortable those conversations are. And even as like a biracial woman, those were not conversations that I felt comfortable having. But so I do think it is really incumbent upon all of us, not just fundraisers, to really be examining the intersection of race and privilege and, where wealth comes from and the way our society is structured. But like James said, these are difficult conversations, and this is not a dive into the deep end. And we all have to do our own personal work with this. And it's taken me a while to get to the point where I feel comfortable challenging donors. And then there's some times where, bit my tongue and then later was like, oh, I should have said something. Why didn't I say something? And that I think is just going to be the tension that we continually try and work on and do better. And we're not always going to get it right. Like I said, there's been times I've sat there and said, I should say something. I should say something. No, I'm not going to say something. And then regretted it later. And that happens. And it's okay when that happens, as long as you are working towards minimizing that and doing better. Does that make sense? Not that it's okay, but I understand how that happens, and we're all on this journey to do better ourselves.
I guess I have one last point to add, and I wanted to reinforce something that Vu said earlier about HR, and that we need to assess like what power we have within our organizations. If we're EDs on this call, or if we're development directors, and we have the power to write job descriptions or change staff evaluation or vouch for our frontline fundraisers, if a donor comes back and says that they've been offended, then that's key. Like, you have to have some education within your organization to know that like the people who are out there doing the work are gonna have, someone's gonna have their back if something comes up. And so you can do that a couple ways. One, just like creating a culture of that, a culture of checking in, a culture of understanding that like this is emotional labor too, especially if your frontline fundraiser is a person of color, and acknowledging that labor and being able to like provide the support and care that that person needs. And then structurally and institutionally, we can write job descriptions where having anti-racism experience and expertise is part of the job. It's part of something that we are all expected to lean into, and it's a percentage of our time. And then that way too, like if something were to happen, and it were to involve HR, then it's part of the organization. It's part of the work of the organization. So transitioning some of those systems of power through HR can actually also provide cover for the staff.
And can I add, I think what we're trying to do is, as Vu alluded to, is reach this tipping point where funders, donors are hearing this from all directions, that there is a new kind of expectation of the way that they engage in their funding. And so I would just specifically take every opportunity. Well, two things. One, I'm calling on allies and those with power, as Chrissy was mentioning, to use that privilege and the ears that they have access to start pushing this message. And then two, using every opportunity strategically to make donors and funders uncomfortable. Ironically, I was not able to make this launch because I was doing donor-centric behavior in engaging in a nationwide webinar for a grant proposal for $60,000. And I wasn't able to make this because I was doing the standard thing. I used that opportunity though in the chat and the Q&A to kind of really call out certain aspects of that application process that I thought were very non-community centric, that made it very difficult, that demanded a lot of the grantee or the applicants to even submit a proposal. And I don't think I was able to phrase it in a way that I don't think it was going to disadvantage my application when I submitted it. And so that's kind of what I mean. I think the more we have, again, this is why we're trying to inspire a movement, not necessarily some sort of centralized organization, is if that becomes standard to demand, to call out, like, you're asking us to do community engagement work, but you're not actually allowing for funds for translation and interpretation and catering and transportation to our meetings. You've already said we can't do that, so we need to constantly be harrying the folks who are creating these programs that are unfeasible in the first place.
Great.
Get it, Sean.
say all that.
Get it.
And we're at 11:30, so we need to request everyone who's still got a point to make to either mail it to us, join the mailing list and do it there, or on our website, create, start a conversation there. But we are out of time. Thank you all. It's been great engaging with it all, and it's really a fascinating, like, huge span of concerns and aspects were raised. I love it.
It's beautiful. Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Again, do use our website to reach out to us. You can also email us, and we're here for it. We're totally here for it.
And we'll see you at the next event about data. It's going to be so exciting. July 24th. We'll send it out on our mailing list.
Yeah, check your emails and check your spam folder just in case you haven't heard from us.
And you're not alone. You are seen. You are not alone. There were thousands of us on this call. We have your back. If something happens for you in your organization trying to do this work, we have your back. So that is why we're doing this. We are organizing across the nation, and we are learning together. And like Michelle said earlier, we're going to make mistakes together, and we're going to learn how to repair harm when we do that. So we love you, and we got this.
Love to you all. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.